Boom! Cha! So, episode 46 of my never-ending Notcast, in which point I'm going to end up probably doing an episode about every single record I ever own. I'm talking in exhaustive detail to an ever-shrinking audience of people. Today, and it's hot on the heels of the episode yesterday, I am going to be talking about what I regard to be possibly U2's greatest and boldest achievement, but not their best record, Pop, from 1997. And I haven't really thought this through in any huge detail, but I'm going to be talking about two things. The first one I'm going to talk about is the album, singles, all the bits that go with that, and in another episode, because I think there's enough meat on the bone to do it, I'm going to be talking through the Pop Mart tour as a completely separate entity. So let's take a quick reminder as to where we are. So it's 1996 and U2 are about 35 years old. The band have been together for 20 years, forming at, I think, a school in 1976. And they're at the point where, you start to ask yourself questions, is who am I? Where am I going? What am I doing with my life? Am I going to be a stupid pop star forever? Those type of questions. And as one of my Twitter friends has quite rightly pointed out, is why did they make pop? Why didn't they just stop at Europa? And I think a lot of bands have this, where you make music because you can, and sometimes you're not quite sure if you should. Now that sounds bizarre and slightly bitchy, and completely the antithesis of everything I'm going to say about these absolutely great records. But I'm always reminded of what Jarvis Cocker said. He said, "Now the best time to leave a party is 2 minutes before you realise you should have left 2 minutes ago." And sometimes the thing with a party is you don't know it's no good until it's too late for you to back out of it. And with Pop, I think U2 made probably their first commercial failure, if selling 7 million records can be regarded as a failure. And it's the first time that I think the band shrank in the eyes of the world a little, started to show that they're perhaps a little bit fallible and not everything was an always infinitely endless upward curve. I think this record is their greatest and boldest achievement. I think it is their singularly most fascinating record, and quite possibly the most interesting record that they made, but it's not the best. In fact, I would probably put this as the third best U2 album, which still makes me very much an army of one compared to the rest of the world. I think most of the rest of the people think it's barely better than October. I can prove why you are wrong with graphs, but instead I will use things like facts, anecdotes, and possibly jokes. And what better joke could there ever be than U2 calling themselves a pop group? Because pop is not the right name for this album. This album is a dark, twisted piece of work that most definitely isn't pop. So it's the last time that the band were truly fearless, truly inventive in what they did. The last time they did something and they hadn't really thought about, well, how successful is this going to be? How many copies is it going to sell? What are the commercial things? So this is probably the last album that the band made without at least one eye upon demographics and marketing strategies. They made the best record that they could, and they committed to it all the way through. There is, even though you may not necessarily think it inside pop, pop is wrapped in sincerity. And whilst all the other stuff that goes around it is armour, which obviously I've mentioned in previous episodes around Axon Baby and Europa, it's the most sincere of their records in many, many ways. The first time that most of us heard any of this was the release of the first single, which came out a staggering 24 years ago this week. Discotheque. I'd like to thank Discotheque for also giving us the finest GIF of the internet of U2. In case any of you doubt it, here it is. Other GIFs are available, but this one is the best. And I know that some of you will disagree with me, but I don't really care, to be honest. So we're going to have to go back a little bit to 1996 when the band were recording. They just bought the Hanover Key studio, which HQ is, as it's now known, started recording in there. And they hit a couple of road bumps to start off with. The first one is that Larry had a long-standing back injury which had first occurred on the Joshua Tree tour, and so he had to have back surgery and he was away from the studio for a number of weeks, and the band built a new production team around them. So there was Flood, there was Howie B, there was a couple of other people that were working in it, but they couldn't play with Larry because Larry couldn't play drums, so they were working around loops and recordings, and that's where I think perhaps the first thing about the album comes in, is when you listen to that, those 3 weeks that they couldn't record with Larry, they'd already committed to some material which had a different feel and a different sound. And that's why I think some people don't think that the album sounds really quite like U2, is because although a lot of people think Larry's just a drummer, if you hear a band with a bad drummer compared to a band with a good drummer, you know how important the drummer is to the band. And I think I've mentioned this previously, if you listen to the early Rush stuff with, I think, John Rutsey versus Neil Peart, who joined on the second album, you can clearly see the difference that a great drummer has in being in band. And playing with loops and samples just wasn't quite the same. So, for example, Do You Feel Loved is a track on the album which was built around a groove from, I think, a track called I think Alien Groove Sensation, I think, by a band called Naked Funk. And if you listen to that, you can hear that actually U2 started playing over the top of that recording and then added their parts to it and took the original parts away to such a point that it became their own song. But then Do You Feel Loved is not a great U2 song, and one of the reasons why it isn't a great U2 song is because it ain't got that swing and that groove. And I know a lot of people are very critical of Larry's drumming, but U2 are a very different band without him, and there are some rehearsals when Larry couldn't perform in 2015 because he was at a funeral, and you can hear the difference that something like a drummer makes to a band. It's not about necessarily the technical ability of the player, it's about the personality of the player coming through and what they perform. It's the thing that we'll hear with the Edge, and the thing that we'll hear with Adam as well, is the notes that they take out are just as important as the notes that you leave in. I think where Pop, I think in my overall assessment, is it's very close to being a great record. And the thing that makes me put it third and not first or second is because I think that there are some flaws in this album. And I've got a playlist which I've made which swaps out some of the mixes and adds a B-side and takes a couple of LP tracks off, which I think makes it their third best album. As it is, this album suffers from what I call CD bloat, which is the same thing that you would have had with artists like Tori Amos, who did Boys for Pele, and other bands. It's suddenly you realise you could put 80 minutes of music on an album, and sometimes you haven't got 80 minutes of music to stick on there. And Pop is a double album. It was the first all studio album that was a double, because Rattle and Hum has 1.5 sides live. And also it was a good 60 minutes long, so it wouldn't have fitted on one vinyl disc, or if it had done, it would have fitted by the barest of margins, and the band decided not to do it. Also, vinyl was dead in 1997. You literally could not give vinyl away between about 1997 and 2009. People weren't buying it. You could walk down the street and there'd quite literally be boxes, crates full of old records with free help yourself on it. And I went through those and I went, I'll have that, I'll have that, I'll have that. I didn't sell my record player. As I said in a previous episode, you could pick up Pink Floyd albums for £2, Bowie albums for £1, original 70s pressings, and I held on to my record player. And so in case you think I'm showing off my record collection, I'm probably more just a vinyl hoarder as opposed to anything else. Now, CD bloat, really important for this album, is that it took an album that probably would have been a very, very good 47-minute album and took it into a not quite so good 60-minute experience. And it's 2 songs too long. So there are 2 songs on this album that I really, really don't like. And those songs are Miami and the Playboy Mansion. They're both in the middle of side 3. And the middle of side 3 is the most dangerous part of any double album, because at that point you're starting to really push the listener's patience and you're moving beyond the normal 45-minute album format into something that's a little bit longer. So you're moving beyond, for example, if I think of albums as being almost like audio versions of movies, they're sonic journeys and sonic films, and you get to the middle point, and then you get, so if you watch a film that's 3 hours long, for example, by the time you get to the 2.5 hour, you're then thinking, Where's the rest of this story got to go? Are you padding it out? Have I watched half an hour in the middle that I didn't need to do? You know, when you think about director's cuts of films like Kingdom of Heaven, for example, or Aliens, or The Abyss, or other movies where, you know, suddenly you find out that whole characters have been taken out of the movie, and the movie doesn't even notice. Full Metal Jacket, for example. The 1987 Stanley Kubrick film. Full Metal Jacket had a completely different script that was shot. Had a lead actor who was not actually in the film in any speaking role, as I understand it. It was actually, they changed the structure of Full Metal Jacket whilst they were making the film and turned it into almost like an abstract travelogue where Matthew Modine's character became really important. And, you know, the actual lead, who had been given a hero's journey through the story of the film, was just reduced to a guy that stood in the background in other scenes. And, you know, pop has the same kind of thing, is that it's got a little bit too much in it. So as a general rule, if you're in U2 and you write a song that's named after either a country or a place in America, so Elvis Presley in America, Elvis ate America, Miami and New York, if you're naming a song after a location either in America or of America, it's generally the worst song on the album. I can prove that if I need to with a graph, but I haven't made a graph in advance about this. But pop has a really dark edge to it. So the two songs on it that I don't like are Miami and the Playboy Mansion. I would take those two out and I would add a B-side called North and South of the River. And I'm going to explain why when I get a little bit further into this. Pop is 95% great, but as you know, 5% can be all the difference between getting drunk after a couple of pints and remaining completely stone cold sober. And that's really, really important, because that 5% is a thing that's called the crunch. And U2 really, really suffered with the crunch when they were making pop. If you're into video games, you know about the crunch. The crunch is the bit where you pull stupid hours just before the deadline, and you join all the connected bits of tissue, you join all the scenes together, and instead of having a film that's made out of lots of separate scenes, you get the masterpiece. Pop is missing that last final crunch because the band had already committed to release. They'd committed to opening the tour in Vegas on the 25th of April 1997. They committed to advertising slots. They'd booked CD booking, pressing plants, vinyl pressing plants, newspaper adverts, TV appearances. And they decided that they were going to crunch this album, and it didn't quite make it. All the other times they've just about made it, you know. And anybody that's worked on a big project will tell you the bit that's right at the end where everything starts to coalesce and come together is where it suddenly becomes brilliant. You know, you make something fabulous out of what seem to be a lot of very disparate pieces, but if you don't have the connective tissue that joins everything together, it's just a bunch of bits of Lego. And I'm going to go into this book here, U2 by U2, and it says a couple of things that were, you know, really, really important about it. Is that Paul McGuinness says pop is always described as the album that didn't get enough time to get finished. It got an awful lot of time. And so, for example, Discotheque, they spent 4 days mixing that right at the end. And you know, if you've got 4 days to mix a song and it's not quite coming together, it's probably not a great hit. The Playboy Mansion had Edge recording backing vocals in the mastering suite after the album had been finished. The chorus to Last Night on Earth was written at 4 a.m. the day that the album was finished and was due to be sent off to the manufacturing run. And it's just too late. You know, the album was just not quite good enough, really. It needed a little bit of extra time. It's like you take something out of the oven a few minutes too early and it's just not as nice. And I think that's the problem with pop, is that it was rushed, and at the same point it wasn't. And I'm prepared to give the band, you know, plenty of leeway about that. But what happened is that those last 2 weeks that turn a good album into a great album weren't there. You know, the band had committed to something, and they never committed to it again, by the way. They never committed to a tour before the album was finished, which is why you've got longer gaps for the Elevation, Vertigo, 360, Innocence and Experience tours. You know, they have big gaps between the tour starting and the album release of generally a few months, 3 months, 4 months. Pop was being toured 6 weeks after the album came out, and the band had this huge multimedia experience to put together in the meantime. But I think where pop is you know, really good is actually, it is quite instinctual in that respect. The technology is being pushed to its cutting edge. Some of those songs definitely don't sound like U2. Mofo sounds like something else completely. There's too many cooks in that song, too many sounds. It doesn't sound like U2. It sounds like something else. And if you weren't on board for Acton Baby and Zeropa, you were off by the time of Zeropa, and you were off by the time of Pop. And it was too much. It was too weird. It was too far for too many people. And people I think were very much like, well, we like the hats, but we prefer the cowboy hats. We don't want the white Vegas hats. And this was U2 in the depth of an identity crisis. And lyrically, it's a very heavy album. It's like, where are we going? What are we doing? Who am I? Who are you? And I think the album had a lack of really big hits. Every other U2 album has a killer hook in it. It's got a pride. It's got a streets. It's got a desire, a one, and this doesn't have it. Discotheque, which was meant to be the big hit, didn't really hit because they misjudged the mood, and the mood was very, very different. So in America, for example, when U2 had last toured America, Nirvana at the height of their fame, Oasis hadn't ever stepped outside of Manchester, Britpop hadn't happened, and the world had changed dramatically in those 5 years, and U2 had kind of carried on the same path and hadn't really been feeling the mood of the room. It's like a guy that turns up and he's late and he's got the wrong clothes on, and he thinks that the type of party that he's going to is not the type of party that he's actually at. U2 dressed in the right clothes for the wrong party for this album. They misjudged the public mood. Now I see the album for what it is, as opposed to what my expectations are for the album or what I wanted the album to be. But it was a big misfire in terms of creatively and commercially. But I've only really shown you this record sleeve. I haven't shown you any of the other stuff that goes with it. And I'm going to explain, I think, visually, and I think it's really important that we start off with this, is that visually, Pop Mart was some of the strongest visuals that the band ever had. So I'm going to go into here. This book here is called Stealing Hearts at a Travelling Show by the Design Company. And what you've got this fantastic, phenomenal visual identity that the band put together around this. They'd taken the concept of pop and they'd taken the concept of art and they pulled it all together to create a tour and an identity which was around music as a mass-produced, commercially available product. They'd been through a lot of iterations of the cover here and a lot of different names. There was like names for the album included things like Novelty Act, Super City Mania, Godzilla, Staring at the Sun, Miami, Discola, all the, and this was a band that was really at this point completely unafraid to take the imagery and the ideas and to throw it all to bits and to come out with something new and unusual and weird. I'm going to talk through the sleeve art, and the t-shirts even are really, really important. So this, for example, the visual representation of the lemon was chosen for the tour by Stephen Averill, as it wanted to be almost like a corporate brand, like the McDonald's Arch is the Coca-Cola sign. And when you look at, and I'm going to go and get a book here, when you look at the U2's stage presentation for the tour, that's the Pop Mart tour. And that is a McDonald's Arch that's serving to you pop food. And pop, by its nature, as a musical genre, is designed to be effortless, disposable, lightweight, fluffy. Pop itself it's all flash, no substance. And U2 were kind of mocking that idea or taking that idea forward, and they're presenting themselves as, well, we're salespeople, we're selling you music. And I think it was a bit too advanced, a bit too arch, a bit too complicated. I think people wanted U2 to be sincere again. And as Bono says in the Pop Tour booklet here, and I really should have checked this beforehand, is that it said all of this is really window dressing. People actually come along to see us and to hear the tunes. That's the truth. I think the rest of it is us trying to make fun of playing in a very big, large space. This is where U2 were at this point, is that they were messing with the medium, and they were turning the artistry. They were doing pop stars. They were doing things like Pop for Girls is one of these. All of this stuff was just around presenting, a silly, like here's even a pop-up Edge. There's the pop-up Edge from the Edge from the Pop Mart tour program, and what U2 were doing with their visuals and their graphic identity, it was really breaking the mold here and telling people that what they were was they're playing with the form. Now, I'm going to kind of say there's an element of pop also that's extremely very retro, that goes back to disco in the 70s and the age of their childhood. And for example, this picture here, which is of the band from the book Anton Corbijn, U2 and I. And you know, those colours, those shirts, that was the world I lived in when I was a child. Those shades of brown. I've got shirts like that now that I wear unironically because it reminds me of being a child. And U2 were doing exactly the same thing, is that there were children playing on an adult stage, taking the piss out of everything that was around them and hopefully making it work. So the first single off Pop, Discotheque, possibly the least popular of the band's lead singles from any of their albums. This is also the song that has been played the least after the main tour. So for example, it's been played live I think twice since 2001, and both of those times were in a short 1 week period in 2005 where the band were changing up their set list. Here's the 3x 12 inch and you know, you can really see that this is going into, and they're dressing in this video and in this period as being like village people, but village people weren't hip, they weren't new. It was almost like it was too soon for nostalgia about disco, but U2 hadn't quite worked that out. And here's the poster that comes with the 12 inch of Discotheque, and it's a lovely thing. I probably just bent a corner of it and halved its value according to wankers on Discogs, but forgive me. Discotheque was a great song, a great U2 song, but it wasn't a great hit single for U2. It wasn't a great return to form. It wasn't a great advert for the album, and it kind of that takes the central theme from Discotheque is also kind of inspired by Planet Telex. By Radiohead, I think, the bit where he goes, well, you can see it but you can't touch it, and you can feel but you can't grasp it, and so on and so forth. And that was borrowed from a Radiohead lyric, and I think it's Planet Telex, but I could be wrong. I might be wrong, in fact, as Radiohead had it. And so that album didn't do particularly well. It's got one of the best U2 B-sides on. It's got a B-side that's called Holy Joe, and Holy Joe might have been released on the B-side of a 7-inch, but it's also on these two CD singles. And here you can really see, you know, the band are, it's like, what happened to U2? What happened to the guys with the hats and the tunes and the sincere stuff about God and love and all that stuff? And it's like, sorry mate, we've gone down a disco. And it's all very, very strange and very weird. And the album starts off like it's the start of a party. It fades in, and then there's 2 or 3 songs which are really kind of quite full on indeed. And in Pop, and this is the 1997 vinyl edition, you know, that's very clearly demarcated in the sides. So Discotheque, Do You Feel Loved, and Mofo are pretty full on kind of loud rock, techno, dance, party type track type things, and then all of a sudden you get to If God Will Send His Angels, Staring at the Sun, Last Night on Earth, and those are heavy songs. That's the hangover kicking in there. Gone Miami, the Playboy Mansion is the next morning. It's the bit where you wake up and you realise who you're in bed with or whatever, and then If You Wear That Velvet Dress, Please, and Wake Up Dead Man close the album. And you look at the artistry that we've got on there. It's not as strong a visual cover as Europa or Actung Baby. I don't think this is by any means the best cover that the band could have had for the album. But what it does do is it kind of leans back to the pop art of Warhol and Lichtenstein and people like that, and the imagery that goes with it. And so, you know, they've got like that fourfold idea. And by the way, I really want that guitar, but I don't think I'll be able to get it because, you know, a guitar made out of mirrors. But then if you open the sleeve here, and you've got, you know, the album sleeve and art and all that stuff, and it's like, what happened to these guys that were standing piously in black and white next to the tree in the desert and singing songs about bloody Sundays? And you know, even there, very clearly it's laying out, well, you know, there's a Pop Mart there. You know, it's a pop group playing pop music. It's a play upon both, you know, the pop as a musical form, pop as an art style, pop art, and also the Pop Mart itself being the way in which they were selling the music. So at this point, the band were already exploding the preconceptions that people have around, well, what U2 are, because it's not those 4 sincere dudes that were telling us about Pride at all. And Luckily, thanks to the miracles of CD technology, there's a lot of different variations that you can have on the cover art. I frequently change the covers on my CDs so that I've got an image that I think is stronger and better. I'm well aware that makes me weird, but frankly, if I can't be me, who can I be? This is the Japanese version of Pop, by the way, and the Japanese version of Pop has a bonus track. It has Holy Joe as track 13, the Guilty Mix. It has a completely Japanese language black and white booklet that's got this lovely graphic on the front that actually I slot very nicely into my CD here. And Japanese editions tend to come with a thing called an obi strip, and I mean, just look at that. You know, the typography, the graphic design, the presentation of that is pretty damn good, isn't it? It's, you know, bright and it's bold and it's unusual, and it looks like it's come from another version of reality than the one that everyone else lives in. And you know, the band hadn't played live to promote this. They'd not played any of the songs until after the album came out. The only song they played before the album came out was Holy Joe, which was a B-side. So the band's taken their biggest break from the world stage, which had been 40 months, the longest period of time the band had ever had from playing live. U2 hadn't made an appearance in 3.5 years by the time they played the first show of Pop Mart in Los Angeles. And it was a really difficult period, I think, for them. And conceptually, the way that the album was presented, and I'm going to bring to you here the orange vinyl edition, I think from 2018, maybe 2017, I think, maybe 2019, the orange vinyl edition of Pop. The way that U2 had started to put their sequencing together was to think about lyrical and thematic joints that went together as opposed to musical connections between the songs. And this is where albums start to become stories, live shows start to become narratives, as opposed to a collection of songs that sits together in an order that makes sense. So, for example, Mofo is around the death of his mother. Last Night on Earth is around, obviously, the Last Night on Earth and death as well. Wake Up Dead Man, clearly about death as well, and has the immortal lyric is Jesus, I'm alone in this world, and a fucked up world it is too, which was written the morning after the Dublin 1993 shows, when the Edge was coming back from a party and arrived at his house and realised that even though he'd just played a stadium less than 12 hours before, he was completely alone in the world. And the irony, as Bono said in November 2000, is the irony of it is that there is no irony. There is never any artifice in the material. The past decade, the artifice was about the presentation of the material. It was all around creating smoke and mirrors and ideas and things like that. In the same way that, for example, the X-Men movies and the bit in X-Men 3, where they talk about possibly a cure or an antidote, is a thinly veiled allegory for, you know, the Holocaust, which is right at the start of the first X-Men movie. It's all around what can happen if people actually criminalise your core nature, and you end up actually telling a story about the Holocaust, and you use superhero movies and a cure for mutants as part of that way of describing it, because you'd never be able to tell a story about, for example, if people wanted to persecute you for your religion or for your sexuality or anything like that. You could never get away with that unless you couched it in the realms of it's a superhero movie and people are scared of the superheroes, for example. U2 were doing the same thing. They were turning the material inside out, and they were showing us something which perhaps we hadn't seen before. Now, as far as I'm concerned, all great art presents a new light upon a reality and presents you with things that were always there but you never previously could have seen. You know, under the paving stones, the beach. That is what art should do, is it should show you that the beach is under the paving stones. Now, I think there's a couple of things around the album which I haven't really kind of addressed, which I should do, which is that, you know, some people, all they saw was the surface. They didn't see anything about sliding down the surface of things. They didn't see any of the subtext that was underneath it. They didn't see the honesty. They didn't see the sincerity. They didn't see anything else. So they just saw that this album, this weird, obtuse article that they couldn't quite penetrate or understand, you know, was an album that presented itself to be a pop album, that presented itself as full of big, heavy hitting singles, and it suddenly it comes around and it bites you halfway through, and there's all these hidden depths that sit alongside the record. So I'm going to go through the singles, which go through it, because I think the tour deserves its own separate identity. So here is the Staring at the Sun single, always intended to be the second single from the album. The band always thought that this was their hidden secret #1, that they couldn't master it live, and they only played it acoustic live for the entire, pretty much, apart from maybe the first or second show. They could only play it acoustic on the entire of the Pop Mart tour. This was the hit single they thought that they had, but if you look at the cover around that, you look at the treatments and the colours and the way that you've got 4 images that are presented with different covers, and then you also look at the cover of the Please single, which, by the way, was not released on vinyl. Same thing, you've got 4 images all treated with various colours and shades and filters, and we're looking at, you know, a pop art type representation of something that's very, very sincere. Staring at the Sun was the hit single that never was, and aside from a brief reappearance on the 2018 Experience of Innocence tour on the US leg, has not been played live since 2001. Here's the other CD single for Staring at the Sun, which has North and South of the River on it. And North and South of the River is not just one of U2's best B-sides. It should have been on the album. Now, as I've said before, the Playboy Mansion and Miami are songs that are about America. And as a non-American person, I find U2 songs about America pretty alienating. Now, when I went to America, I went to Chicago, Oklahoma, Vegas, and I was very clearly, when I was walking around in Chicago, and I went, they shot The Matrix down that alley. But it's like living in a movie if you don't actually live there. And to me, I'm not anywhere near as fascinated with art about the concept of America, although it is something that U2 return to again and again and again throughout the courses of their careers. But what with this is that North and South of the River and Please are 2 songs that really need to be right next to each other, right at the climax of the album. So take Miami out, take the Playboy Mansion out, move If You Wear That Velvet Dress to somewhere else on the album, and make side 3 North and South of the River, Please, and Wake Up Dead Man. North and South of the River is about living in a divided city, about the difference between the North and the South. And it's no coincidence, by the way, that the Berlin Wall ran through the river, north of the river and south of the river in Berlin, was part of it, which was the area between being communist and being in a democracy. It's the same thing, the same kind of things that they're dealing with here. North and South of the River is a great U2 song, and you should hear it if you like pop. And in fact, whenever you listen to pop, you should put North and South of the River in front of Please. And Please, by the way, is the next song on the album that should follow it. Now, I'm going to touch upon Please in a minute. I'm going to go out of sequence here for a minute because I'm crazy, and I'm going to present to you with the single for Please, which is somewhere where I can't remember where I've stuck it. There it is. But Please is a U2 classic. This is the song they should be playing live on every tour. This is the song that Sunday Bloody Sunday should have been. It is everything that Sunday Bloody Sunday wishes that it was. It's a powerful, vibrant, articulate plea towards unity, and we really need that in this day and age. And on the Pop Mart tour, the segue that goes from Please into Where the Streets Have No Name is the best segue that I have seen in U2's career around that. And they're very, very good at doing segues, but the one between Please and Where the Streets Have No Name on the Pop Mart tour is the best one. It is one of the best U2 songs, and they should play it all the time. And by the way, Please was not the third single from the album. Staring at the Sun wasn't. That was the second. The third single from the album is Last Night on Earth. And here, as I've mentioned before, with Staring at the Sun and Please, you've got the band taking around the concepts of Warholian colour variations, and that print of baked beans that endless change. This is the edge. Effectively almost recreating Munch's The Scream here. The band are deep inside referencing modern and ancient art. And it's a great CD single. It's backed with an 8-minute version of pop music and a version of cover of the Beatles' Happiness is a Warm Gun. At least I think it's a Beatles song. If it's not, it's a John Lennon one. But as you can see, you've got the 12-inch single here, and you've got the CD single here, which has also got the Soul Assassins mix of Numb on it. So the band were really padding out. They've got an awful lot of remixes around this period. And Last Night on Earth, by the way, the single version of Last Night on Earth, which is on the CD single, which I just kind of showed to you here, it has a different vocal on it, it has a different chorus, and it was re-recorded in a mobile studio in the car park behind the back of the Pop Mart stage somewhere on tour. So the band were going into the studio and re-recording the singles. Over half of Pop has been re-recorded or remixed or added to after the release of the album. So you've got the singles of Last Night on Earth, you've got the single of Please, and by the way, the version of Please on the album fades out. The version of Please on this single has a hard conclusion. It features a full orchestra on it, and it features an actual genuine ending. And this is the single on the version on the CD single is the definitive take of Please. Please, please, please get Please on CD, because not only is this got the best version of one of the best U2 songs, it's got 2 remixes of Dirty Day, which are remixed by I think Butch Vig of Garbage, and it's also got an instrumental version of a track called I'm Not Your Baby, which is from the soundtrack to a Wim Wenders film. And I Am Not Your Baby is one of the best U2 songs as well. So the band were really not putting their best tracks on the album, but Please is an absolutely essential, brilliant U2 song and EP. And moving through that kind of period, around about the same time, there's the Pop Mart Sampler, which is a promotional only US double album of 8 remixes from Achtung Baby, from Zeropa, and from Pop. Effectively, it's a vinyl edition of the Melon album, by the way. And look, there's brilliant visual design there on that. And it's got remixes of Lemon, Numb, Happiness is a Warm Gun, Pop Music, Mysterious Ways, Last Night on Earth, Discotheque, and Even Better Than the Real Thing. So every single track on it has got the best remix of one of the best tracks that they've got. So effectively, if you want to get a cheaper version of the Melon album on vinyl, go for the Pop Mart Sampler, and just look at that's brilliant bit of artistry. That sleeve design is fantastic, and it really should be better known. Now, not that I'm dropping suggestions to the fan club around what to release in future, but maybe a version of this would go down pretty well. Maybe. If not, I think it's on Discogs for about 25 quid, which effectively to get a vinyl double U2 remix album is pretty affordable. And the band didn't stop cranking out the remixes. There's a 12-inch of Mofo, which has 5 extra remixes on, and also we've got the Please Pop Heart EP, which is a live EP, 4 songs recorded live on the Pop Mart tour. And calling it Pop Heart, I think, is a way of kind of almost trying to reclaim the band's reputation, because people were like, well, they're arch, they're weird, they're unusual. And it's going, no, actually, there's a screaming heart of sincerity deep inside Pop, and it's just itching to come out. This also has, by the way, the segue of Please and Where the Streets Have No Name, alongside live version of With or Without You and Staring at the Sun. So the band were really great at producing extra tracks for CD singles around about this period. Now, last single from the album, double A side, If God Will Send His Angels, and Mofo. Now, If God Will Send His Angels was remixed and had re-recorded material on it, by the way, and then also it was backed with Slow Dancing, which is a duet with Willie Nelson, and 2 shots of Happy, 1 shot of Sad, and a live version of Sunday Bloody Sunday. Again, a great CD single, very much worth getting. But what it showed is that the band were slowly replacing every track on the album, or near enough every track, with an alternate single recording or remix. And so, for example, they did the best of 1990 to 2000, which features re-recordings and heavily augmented versions of Discotheque, Staring at the Sun, and Gone. And you put those 3 tracks on, then you also put Please, If God Will Send His Angels, Last Night on Earth, and suddenly you've got 6 of the 12 tracks on the album have been re-recorded and remixed completely. And if you use those remixes and re-recordings and you slot it out effectively, you get a much stronger version of the album, because Last Night on Earth has a chorus that's been worked through far more. Please has a definitive ending. Gone as just a better, stronger sound. Discotheque is like the live arrangement, so it's got less boom, cha, boom. It's all far more nebulous and touchy-feely. And there you go. Mofo, by the way, is effectively the If God Will Send His Angels remix EP. It has 2 mixes of Mofo on out of the 5, which are on the 12-inch, which I just showed you, plus a remix, the grand jury mix of If God Will Send His Angels. And there's a lovely photograph of Mono there. That kind of brings the pop album, the discussion of the pop album, to a close. I think what I will say is I still rate it very, very highly. As far as I'm concerned, Pop is my 3rd favourite U2 album, and it's my 3rd favourite U2 album because it's really bloody good. I know I've been a bit disparaging about it, and if you think carefully about it and you want to use perhaps some of the remixes, the single mixes, and change the playlist around them, I'll put that in the YouTube comments. Then you get a much stronger version of the album with better versions of the songs on. But it's a fascinating flawed failure. It's the last time that U2 really went out there and made something that artistically they felt fully behind, as opposed to thinking about commerciality, focus groups, marketing, reapplying for the job of best band in the world. Before they started doing that, this was where U2 committed to just being weird, and because it had worked every other time before, they thought people were going to follow them, and it didn't happen this time round. And so the next time I'm going to talk through the next episode, I'm going to talk through Pop Mart, which is the tour that went alongside Pop, which I think is strong enough and more important enough and has enough meat in it to talk about the tour as a separate episode. But Pop as an album, I love it to bits, and it's really strong. It's also the oldest U2 album apart from Rattle and Hum, which has a movie. Apart from Rattle and Hum, Pop is the oldest U2 album to yet have a deluxe fancy pants multi-disc edition in a box set. And I think it's really, really underappreciated. This album needs to be rehabilitated, loved, and taken back in as the errant son that was spent the past 24 years out in the wilderness. Come home, Pop. We love you, and we want to see you back in the set list. I'm going to wrap up there. Thank you. Usual rules, don't be a dick in the comments section. I see what you're doing, especially you. And I will catch up with you with another episode. Probably the next one I'm going to be talking through is the Pop Mart tour. And my God, what a lot we've got to chew through that. So, Pop, U2's Grand Madness, a fascinating failure, a child that was prematurely born that has grown on to become a fascinating but flawed adult. And like all the best artists, U2 and their records have aged generally really, really well. And this album in particular, I think, as I've become older, and bearing in mind I'm about 10, 15 years younger than the band, as I have become older, this album has revealed to me more and more of its maturity as I have grown old with it. Now, at this point, U2 are the first band to really have done what they're about to do here. So they're growing older, they're becoming adults, they're becoming middle-aged, they're becoming elder statesmen of rock. The standard lifespan that you have for a rock career is, if you are very, very lucky, is 20 years. U2 have gone past the 20-year phase here. They are now in uncharted territory with no lineup changes throughout their career, a steady rise of successes. No one's ever done anything quite like that before. What we're about to see is what happens next. The next episode is Pop Mart, where I talk through the tour. But after that, we have the band's first crisis of confidence. Now, as I've said before, lots of U2 songs, if you replace the word love for God, they still stand true. Pop is an argument with God about the nature of reality. Help me, Jesus, I'm alone in this fucked up world. And that is what this album is. It should have been, Bono said it should have been called Shouting at God, by the way. So it's an album where a band that's got faith deeply ingrained in it starts to ask really deep questions around who am I? Where am I going? What am I going to become? And they end up presenting themselves as almost, a version of themselves that doesn't really exist, as avatars, as people called U2 that happen to be called Bono and the Edge, but the version of them that we see is not the version of them that there is. And they're hiding these deeply cynical, troubling songs inside disco beats and weird hats. And that is where I think I'm going to end up. I love Pop. It's a great record. And I'd like you to listen to it again and give it another chance, because inside that madness there is some really great art. Pop art, Pop Mart, Pop Mark. I should work in puns, and I'm going now, or maybe pop marketing, in fact. And at that point, I'm going to end before I dig myself any deeper a hole inside a terrible grave called dad jokes, because I am a dad and I make jokes. It's been lovely. Don't be a dick in the comments. I will see you all again soon. Thank you and goodbye.